Yo, it's money. Back again talking about, revealing knowledge of maneuvering these 9 to 5 jobs and just basic life lessons, and today let's talk about Gen X women at the job. Yeah, Gen X women at the job. Fuck, Gen X women, period, maybe. But Gen X women at the job. Gen X women at your job, what does that look like? You know, um, I gotta be completely honest here. These women are toxic. These Gen X women are toxic. I've never ran into a Gen X woman inside the job, outside the job, that wasn't toxic. If the boomers have this chaos energy, Gen X women, they have this toxic energy. And I'm not talking about Gen X. I don't think, it's less for Gen X men though. But Gen X women, I've never, I used to have a boss that was Gen X. My supervisor at one of my jobs was Gen X woman. And this woman was toxic, man. I'm serious. Like, I eventually left that job because of her. She was so toxic, she couldn't fire me because she was so toxic. She treated me so fucked up. Shit is caught on camera at your job. You know what I'm saying? Like, this woman was so toxic at my job that she couldn't fire me. She had to ask me to resign. It was that bad, literally. Like, you couldn't fire me. And, at that time of my life, I didn't really know about workers' rights and stuff like that. To be honest, I had a whole lawsuit, and I flushed that. I wasn't aware of these things. I was just taking it one day at a fucking time there. And my supervisor at this job, holy hell, toxic. Like, just for no reason, just wake up like that. Like, that's just them. It's embedded. It's their part of their programming. For some reason, I don't know. It to needs to be researched. Seriously, Gen X women need to be studied seriously, because it's not too late for them. We're talking about women in between the ages of like 38 and like 40 something, their early 40s. Like 38 and like 44 or some shit like that. Like, these are Gen X women. And it's not too late for them. But I wanted to bring up what did I want to bring up about them? Gen X women, they're in between the ages of 38 and 44. They need to be studied. These women, these Gen X women, ask yourself, Gen X women, how many children do you have? I bet it's not more than 3 maximum. Maybe 2. They're in between 0 and 3 children. And the baby boomers put all you motherfuckers to shame. Like, you should be embodying the baby boomers. Like, they that's where family comes from. Like, you have all this family, like, and this is where, our population, our birth rates are low. I believe that's Gen X. Something about that generation, didn't want to have a lot of children. They wanted to have 1 or 2 kids, and that was it. Like, 1 and done, 2 and done. Maybe 3 was that accident for them. You know, they didn't want a third children. Gen X women, you know, I think Gen X men too share that. They didn't want to have a lot of children for some reason. I just think is because, I don't know, the economy, it's an economy thing. It needs to be studied. You know, this is where, and oh yeah. So Gen X women, these are our Karens. You know, look online, do your research. These are the Karens. It's Gen X women. And the Karens, and I'm not gonna say the Kens, the Kevins or some shit. It's the Karens and the Kevins. You know, like these are the people that are chasing you down the street, you know, not in their vehicle. They're on their 2 feet and they're chasing you or some shit, and they're all in your business, and they think you're up to something, and they're being a Karen, and next thing you know, they're chasing you down the damn street, yelling at you. You know, they're screaming at the world, you know, and it needs to be studied. You know, like we need a documentary because, you know, I'm serious. Look online. It's Gen X women. Those are the Karens. It's not boomer women, and no. Boomer women are busy with their boomer men. You know, they're retired. Damn, most of them are retired. Most boomers are retired, so they're not the Karens and the Kevins. They're not them. You know, they're too busy. You know, they're retired. They're enjoying their goddamn lives right now. You know, Gen X, those are the Karens. You know, these are the women screaming at you. You know, their minds, I don't know why they operate like that, but you know, the Gen X women, especially at your job, you know, these are the Karens. You know, these are the women that are gonna snitch on you. You know, these are the women that if they see you do anything wrong at your job, like they're writing it down, they're making a list, and they're checking it twice. You know, like they're building a case against you, you know, at all times. At all times. Inside the job and outside the job. These women are building a case on you. You know, they're trying to find out how to first 48 you. You know what I'm saying? Like, these women are trying to figure out, you know, can I first 48 you? You know, like, what's the easiest way to catch your body? You know what I'm saying? These women are toxic as hell. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are the women that are, you know, picking up knives when they freak out, you know, and trying to cut you. You know what I'm saying? Like, Gen X women will fight you. You know what I'm talking about? Fist fight. You know what I'm saying? Gen X women will punch you in your fucking lip, and you'd be like, what the hell is going on? Like, you know, and I'm not even saying you deserve the punch in the face. That's what I'm trying to say. These women are toxic. Like, they'll punch you in the face for fucking nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't give a fuck. They don't at all. Like, they think they're right 90% of the time, and that little 10%, you know, they will feel the shame. But and they might do a little self-reflection. It's not even self-reflection for them. They're just like, oh, I did that. That you might get a my bad. You know, and it's not off. You might get a, oh, my bad, I was tripping. That's rare for Gen X women, you know? That's rare. You know, these Gen X women, like I said, that supervisor I had, holy hell. You know, I personally, when she asked me to resign, I said, thank God. Thank God. Yes, I will sign the paper. I'm not fighting to stay here. You know, like, which was to my detriment because I had a case. I could have kept my job. You couldn't fire me. Hell no. It was not all I did was do my job. You know what I'm saying? These Gen X women, like I said, they'll build a case against you, or at least make an attempt or think they're building a case against you. It's part of their programming. You know, Gen X women, You know, they're part of the reason why we have a population decline. You know, if the women are toxic, you know, the men aren't gonna want to have a lot of children with you anyways. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's kind of a lie, but you know, I'm talking about the Gen X man that has their fucking head together on their shoulders. They're not having a lot of children with toxic women. You know, but as far as a toxic Gen X man, oh yeah, they're pumping these babies out with these toxic women, you know? That's different though, but it's slim. It's more slimmer. It's a more niche thing. Because toxic Gen X men, motherfucker, they're in jail, prison, or they're halfway house. They're something. You know, like they're going through their own journey. They're not worried about having children. Most of Gen X toxic men are not worried about having children, bro. They're doing their own thing, bro. Like they're trying to find their enlightenment. You know, they're going through their own journey. They don't have time to be out here popping kids out. They don't have the time. These toxic Gen X men, they don't have the time. Literally, they don't. They have other things to worry about in their lives. But as far as a Gen X man with the head on their shoulders, we're not talking about them. Fuck that. Back to Gen X women. You know, Gen X women, holy shit. You know, it needs to be studied. You know, and verify this online. I'm serious. It's these Gen X women. They're the Karens of the world right now. You know, it needs to be studied. Be mindful of Gen X women. Like I said, they're in between the ages of like 38, like 44, something like that. They're in between this bracket there. You know, and toxic. Leave a comment. I'm telling you about a Gen X woman. You'd be surprised. You know, like I'm telling you, there's a Gen X woman that works at the damn gas station over here. Toxic. You know, like I know. Does she mean well? Does she mean well? You know, that's the question you're asking about these Gen X women. Like, does she mean well, or is she just fucking with me? You know, um, I think they mean well. They're just so toxic. They don't understand or comprehend it. Like, they can't. And for the ones that do comprehend that, they just embody it fully. Like, they don't let it go. The toxic women that are aware of their toxicity, you know, they fully embody it, and they use it to their advantage. You know, they use it as a tool, their toxicity, you know, and it does get them, it's to their detriment, but for the most of the time, you know, Gen X women know how to use their toxicity to their advantage, you know, and that gets them to that supervisor position, manager. You know, they're your district managers, your supervisors. You know, it's like they use it to their advantage. They use it as a tool. They need to be studied. I'm serious. These Gen X women, you know, they're very special for their generation. You know, they're not like boomer women. Boomer women are more chaotic. They're not toxic. You know, they boomer women are more chaotic. It's not toxicity. You know what I'm saying? Boomer women can react in a way where it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Boomer women will react in a way compared to Gen X women where it'll make more sense than Gen X women. You know, Gen X women, you're like, but why did you do that? You know, like, don't even ask that question. We ask that in our heads. Like, why did they do that? You know, like, oh, they were tripping. Oh, they were crashing out. You know, these Gen X women will crash the fuck out. You know what I'm saying? And they don't give a fuck. You know, and sometimes that's a good thing. You know, that sometimes that's a good thing about women. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes you need your woman to be able to crash out. That's the woman that's gonna, uphold you, and it's also a good thing. They're gonna uphold their man, and they're willing to crash out for them. It is it needed partially, but like I said, the toxicity is so embedded that it could be more of a detriment than something for the better, like these Gen X women at the job, bro. How did she even get to that supervisor position? Wow. Like it amazes me how. I don't want to know. I don't want to know why. How? I don't want to know why. I don't. I'm not in their business. I'm staying far away from Gen X women as possible. Like at a distance. We're at a distance. We're like this. Like you don't want to get too close to a Gen X woman. Like these bitches will bite your head off. Like I said, they're building a case against you. You got to be aware of these things, bro. Like, and if you ever ran into a Karen or anything of that nature, reflect on that. Like, oh, like you ran into a Karen. Like, what age was she? Oh, that was Gen X. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was Gen X. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, most of the time, yeah. Like 90% of the time, it's a Gen X. It's not, It's not, these millennials crash out in different ways, and you can tell it's a millennial crash out. Like, Gen X woman is very special for them, It cannot be copied. Millennial women, they're different from Gen X women, and Gen X women are definitely different from Boomer women, like, and the generations in between. Gen X women need to be studied. There needs to be a documentary on Netflix about Gen X women. I'm serious. It would blow up. Seriously, it'd be a very popular documentary. Cause they have so much. They have paperwork on them. You know what I'm saying? Like they're building paperwork on everybody else, but we're writing these things down and observing these Gen X women. Like, okay, be careful out there. Excuse me. Yeah, Gen X women at the job. Yeah, toxic. Now, is it fun to talk to Gen X women sometimes? Yeah. Gen X women are fun, Gen X women know how to party. Gen X women, they know how to have a good time. And if you're having a good time with Gen X women, if you're in a place where Gen X women are having a good time, you're gonna have a good time. But it's outside of that party environment. They're more toxic. The Gen X women love to party. I noticed that Gen X women have a way better time when they're outside of their job, away from responsibilities. You want Gen X women away from responsibilities as possible. Don't bring any stress to their life. Fucking throw a party, drink some alcohol, smoke something. You're gonna have a good time with Gen X women. But outside of that party environment, you gotta be careful. Like I said, they're trying to first 48 you. You know what I'm saying? I'm serious. Like, they're trying to first 48 you. You gotta be careful out there. These women, these Gen X women, Wow, amazing. You know, and they have Gen X women have big personalities. You know, very big personalities. You know, which is the fun part of them. You know, you can joke with Gen X women too. You know, if you know how to joke with them. You know, you just can't say certain things to them or it'll offend them. You know, fuck, your face will just offend a Gen X woman. You know what I'm saying? If you know what I'm saying, we're talking about Gen X women with already resting bitch face, and now they have a problem with your resting bitch face, and you're just like, they're taking offense to it. You know, they're taking offense to your resting bitch face because I have resting bitch face, so I get these reactions from Gen X women where they're like, smile, you know, or something, and they're like, oh, grumpy, you know, they're making these slight comments. You know, I mean, my eyebrow might twitch sometimes. I'm like, why? Why do you have a problem with me and my facial expression when I walk in? You know, like, they always have to make this comment about you in your face. You know what I'm saying? It's never about how you're dressed or anything. Like, that's only if you get into some sort of battle with a Gen X woman. Now they're clowning what the fuck you're wearing and everything. And Gen X women are very good at flaming you. You know, Gen X women will flame the shit out of you. You know, to be honest, I think that's most of the comedians too, the Gen X women. I don't think they're millennials. When you watch these Gen X women, they're comedians, you know, on Netflix and shit like that. They know how to flame, you know, and that, like I said, they use that toxicity to their advantage, you know, and it gets them farther than most others. You know, I give it up to them. I give it up to them. Excuse me. I give it up to them. Shit, I think there's a Gen X woman that just parked in front of me. Seriously. She's looking at me right now like, what's this guy doing at my area? They're fucking gangbangers. You know, there's Gen X women are gang members. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're talking about gang members here. These women, you know, she's over here probably plotting my first 48 right now. You know what I'm saying? What's this guy being parked at my spot right now? You know, fuck this guy. You know, I should get out and say something. You know, like, Karen, I'm telling you, watch. Seriously, if that happens right now, I'm gonna be like, wait, I knew it. I knew it. You know, yeah, Gen X women at your job. What does that look like? You know, wow. You know, toxic. You know, they're building cases against you. You know, Karens. They're Karens. You gotta let's be aware of these things. They're Karens. You know what I'm saying? They need to be studied. There needs to be a documentary made as soon as possible. Serious. I'm serious. The world will benefit if we have not an exposure, you know, they need that. Yeah, that information needs to be exposed. You're damn right. The information, not the women themselves, but the information needs to be exposed. Seriously, the world will get a lot farther because then we can all recognize, oh, okay, don't fuck with Gen X women unless they're in some sort of party environment. You know, that's you'll see the happiest you'll see a Gen X woman. You know, it's either she just bought a new car, or, you know, I mean, like I said, these women are mostly in high up places. You know, so they're running that bag. They're getting their money. You know, Gen X women, I don't think they're not broke out here. You know, they know how to make their money. Like I said, they use all of their personality and everything to their advantage. Their toxicity, they use that as a tool. And they're going to make sure to get in that higher up place. you know, wherever, inside the job or outside the job. You know, they're going to make sure they have some sort of status. You know, they're going to make sure their status is cemented in some sort of way, which is a good thing, you know, and a bad thing. You know, mostly bad, but yeah. Mostly bad with Gen X women, but you know, there are good parts. There are good parts, but more bad than good with Gen X women that I know of. You know, I don't want to be anywhere close to a Gen X woman unless I'm at a party. You know, period. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Gen X woman. You know, do I feel bad for you? A little bit. You know, because you know, you had all the opportunities growing up. You know, like, I don't know what it was when they were younger, because I'm a millennial, but I haven't studied Gen X enough. You know, Gen X women went through some shit too, but do I specifically know? Not really. You know, Gen X women are a special case. You know, it needs to be studied. It's like a CIA folder. They have like a FBI folder on Gen X women. They need to be studied. FBI have statistics on them bigger than most. You know, they're hyper aware of these things about Gen X women. And fuck, maybe even higher up people use that as an advantage. Yep, here comes Gen X. Is that Gen X? Yep, here comes Karen. Oh, she's coming my way. Hold your breath. Shh, shh, shh. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. Look the other way. Don't look. Mind your business. Don't look at a Gen X woman out here, because, like I said, they're the Karen's. Holy shit, the bitch disappeared. Whoa, what did she just do? I thought she just took a picture of me. She just took a selfie. I swear to God. Yeah, it's like a walking bomb or something. Like, holy fuck. She's like a walking dynamite right now. Like, she could explode at any moment. You know, like, wow. Gen X women in the wild right now. But I see the Karen. You know, she's out here. She's doing her walking, her jogging. Gen X women are heavy on social media. You know, they love a selfie. You know, they're you know, it's a good thing they're obsessed with themselves, because you know that's part of the self-care. You know, you know, Gen X women can look really good. You know, they're really good at self-care. I will give them that. You know, I will give them that. They're really good at self-care. But you can see their resting bitch face, you know. Here she goes. She's starting to jog. You know, wow. But you know, that's the woman at your job that you need to be aware of. You know, she's building a case on you. You know, I should have a tie-in with this Gen X woman jogging at the park right now. Like I said, the first 48. You know, this woman is gonna first 48 you as soon as possible. You know, she's trying to figure it out. That's what she's probably thinking about right now while she's jogging. You know, she's thinking of all the sinister ways to take advantage of the world we're in. You know, I'm gonna look my best. I'm gonna look as beautiful as possible. I'm gonna shield my toxicity and slither my way into some shit. You know, that's just what I wanted to get off my chest for today about Gen X women. You know, I might have a follow-up video about them later. Not today, but another day we could talk about Gen X women. But yeah, be aware of Gen X women at your job. You know, they're trying to build a case against you. What Gen X women outside the job, they're trying to first 48 you. You know, the toxicity is crazy. It's off the Richter scale. You know, they broke that scale. You know, there's no scale to measure toxicity for Gen X women. It's their own thing. You know, it's money, you know, revealing knowledge about maneuvering these 9 to 5 jobs and just basic life lessons in general, you know. And I hope you learned something. Peace.